Good afternoon and welcome to today's post-cabinet press briefing. I have two announcements to make today. Cabinet agreed to the re-establishment of the National AIDS Coordinating Committee and the supporting secretariat at the Office of the Prime Minister to coordinate and monitor the expanding response to the continuing problem of HIV/AIDS in Trinidad and Tobago. The committee will be headed by a technical director and include a deputy technical director and supporting staff in the Office of the Prime Minister. Now, the work of the committee will be reviewed after 6 months after it becomes operational. Cabinet also agreed today to the Ministry of Community Development, Culture and the Arts entering into a contract with the Urban Development Corporation for the construction of 5 two-story community centers at Taradale in San Fernando, Bonnet Gardens, Aruca, Cantaro in St. Anne's, Bagatelle in Diego Martin, and South Diego Martin. The 5 community centers will cost an estimated $40 million. Now, with those two announcements, I am open for your questions.
Good afternoon, Minister Cuffie. Just before we go on to some other questions, the re-establishment of the NACC, have we identified who will head that committee?
No, the cabinet didn't deal with the names for the committee. What we did was agree that it will be re-established in the Office of the Prime Minister. And we approved the structure. And again, the next step would be identifying names and people to fill those positions.
On a slightly separate issue, I just wanted to get your comments on the statements made by Mayor Raymond Timke. Do you think those comments were appropriate considering it was associated with the discovery of a body at the Queen's Park environment?
Well, first of all, I'd like to extend my condolences to the family and friends of the person who was found. I read in the newspaper today that she was a regular visitor to Trinidad and Tobago and participated in our cultural activities over the carnival period. So my prayers and thoughts go with her and her family.
You didn't answer the question of whether or not you felt it was appropriate or not for him to make those comments.
Well, I speak here based on the cabinet directives, and we did not discuss Minister Timpe's statement, and I really wouldn't want to go into commenting on that matter.
I agree that here is the forum for dealing with cabinet issues, but this is a very sensitive issue, Minister Cuffie, and there's been a lot of commentary about it since the comments were made yesterday. He's insinuating that she may have brought this onto herself, and as a mayor associated with the People's National Movement, I am sure that you don't feel comfortable with some of those statements.
Well, I always like to tell reporters, I do not speak in my personal capacity. First and foremost, I am not here to speak on behalf of the PNM. I am here to speak on behalf of the cabinet. This matter did not come before the cabinet today. It wasn't discussed by the cabinet. As you understand, we were in cabinet. We didn't have a chance to peruse the newspapers. I happened to read it, and that's why I extend my condolences on behalf of the cabinet to the family.
Well, would you be able to comment on your personal capacity? How do you feel regarding those comments made by the mayor?
I don't comment on my personal capacity as a minister of government.
Do you think there's a general social problem of victim shaming, in particular in relation to women?
Well, what I would say is that these issues are sensitive and should be approached with sensitivity. And the reason I don't know enough about the circumstances surrounding the young lady's death, and so I don't want to comment, on things that I don't know about. But I think this is a tragic situation, and my thoughts and prayers go out to her family and, her friends who came here and come here annually to participate in Carnival. So I think this is a tragic event, and I'm sorry I don't want to add to the news furor over it.
Ground to the Citizens Minister, just a follow-up. Would any member of the cabinet seek to have any discussion with the Port of Spain mayor with regard to the comments he has made, which he is now apologizing for?
Well, I didn't even know that the mayor had apologized for his comment.
Well, he said his comments were taken out of context, so
Okay.
it may not necessarily be interpreted as an apology by some.
Okay.
Just to clarify.
No. So I think you can understand my caution. Having been in cabinet for the morning, I do not know what has transpired. I saw before the comments that were reported in the Express. Now you're telling me that the mayor says that it was taken out of context. So let me get some context, and then I'm quite happy to answer your question. But I don't want to talk about something that I don't know, that I haven't had a chance to get any, to find out what the facts are.
With all due respect, Minister, hence the question I just asked in terms of whether or not any member of the cabinet plans to speak with the mayor on the issue, the comments he had made.
To be honest with you, I don't think that many members of the cabinet would have seen the mayor's comments before the cabinet meeting this morning. Cabinet is intense, and people have to read all their notes and be prepared for cabinet. So some members would not have had a chance to read it. The mayor, in terms of the responsibility, he I wouldn't say reports to, but he deals with the Minister of Rural Development and Local Government, and I did not get a chance to ask the Minister whether he intended to have any conversation with him on that.
Well, in that context, I'm really asking him, because there's no call for Mayor Raymond Tinky to be removed altogether, and an autopsy that was done on the young girl's body found that she was strangled, which makes the comments a bit more insensitive.
Okay.
So will there be some alacrity in terms of trying to get to the bottom of this?
I am sure that the matter is under investigation by the police, I'm sure. And what I can undertake to do is to find out the circumstances surrounding the mayor's comments and, have us respond.
Just to revisit one of your announcements earlier, in terms of the re-establishment of the National AIDS Coordinating Committee, any determination at this stage in terms of funding for the committee, or will that be determined later on?
Well, the cabinet decision said that the Minister of Finance would be asked to provide a budgetary allocation for the committee in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Well, and at what point could we expect to have a sense of the funding, an announcement of the figure?
As soon as we find out, we'll know. We've identified staff, the positions that will be needed in the unit. When the unit starts, then they will have to identify our program, identify a budget. So it's still a little way off to say exactly how much money would be required.
Just on the issue of Carnival, normally we would hear it's the safest Carnival. Over the past few years, we've heard that statement. We did have, of course, the homicide concerning a masquerade from Japan. Now, is there two others as well? Is that something that the cabinet discussed in terms of the National Security Minister discussed the matter with the cabinet?
No, what I know is that the police commissioner in yesterday's paper on Tuesday expressed satisfaction with how the carnival had progressed. The National Security Minister also congratulated all the security forces who worked throughout the carnival and ensured that it was safe. Now, there have been developments since carnival that raise questions, but as far as I'm aware, and as far as the Ministry of National Security, they, I think all parties were impressed by the work of the security forces and the fact that the carnival up to Tuesday evening was relatively incident-free. There were some minor incidents, as reported on Tuesday evening. The murder was only discovered on Wednesday morning.
You did also have, Minister, the issue of the PNM councillor who was assaulted by members of the security team of the band Yuma. Yuma, of course, did say that they had removed those persons from the security detail that they had with the band. Generally, there are very good security companies in the country with very good security officers, but this was one of, I think, at least 2 incidents concerning members of security personnel with mass bands. Is that something that the government would want to look at for the next carnival in terms of training and so on? As I said, I don't think that represents the majority of security officers, but is that something the government would want to look at?
Well, I did read the comments of the chairman of the NCC, who expressed concern about a number of developments with this year's carnival, and he has undertaken to do the normal post-mortem that occurs, but also to look at, new areas of operation in terms of making the carnival more efficient, more effective, more enjoyable. So I think as time goes on, you should take the chairman of the NCC up on his promise and see what happens.
Just at the cabinet level, in terms of legislation, for example, there's been an argument posed by some persons in the legal community, for example, that masqueraders and even persons in security and so on with mass bands have no more right to be on the road legally than any person who's actually not a masquerader. Is that something that the government would want to look at in terms of legislation, or is it satisfied with the status quo?
Let me give you an idea of how this proceeds. You have carnival interest groups who, under the legislation that governs carnival, are all members of the NCC. The interest groups meet, they discuss their problems, their issues, and they make recommendations as members of the NCC. The NCC as a board makes recommendations to the Ministry of Community Development. And every carnival there is a post-mortem where they look at their problems and they go forward to make recommendations as to how they can be solved. Now, given what transpired in this year's carnival, the cabinet can't unilaterally, without consultation, just make decisions on carnival. There's a consultative process that is allowed to progress, and at the end, the cabinet gets involved. So, but we haven't gotten to that point yet.
Just on a separate issue, some concerns were raised, I think, by the former Speaker of the House, Mark, about the Prime Minister sitting on the Restorative Committee for the Red House and making some changes, I think, to the scope of works there. And I think the concern that you raised is that the Parliament should have full autonomy of the scope of works for that project, and not necessarily a committee headed by the Prime Minister, because it may deal with the issue of the separation of powers and so on. And I'm just wondering if the issue has been discussed, are you aware of it, and is there any comment that you can give?
Well, what I can say is I agree with the position as articulated in the Express editorial today. Now, this is a project that has been going on for 20 years. And you're right, we have had various committees. The Prime Minister was a member of the committee. But I think after 20 years, we need to get something done. And the Prime Minister appointed a committee last week and advised the media of the committee. And he, as the elected Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, has decided, after touring all these buildings, finding them in quite deplorable condition, and for many of them, work has been going on for a very long time. He has decided to take personal responsibility as head of this committee to get it done. And I see the Express uploaded it today, and I think I can only agree with their position.
Just one minute, Minister. Did the Cabinet receive an update on the implementation of the new VAT regime?
That was not discussed today, but I last week in the post-cabinet press briefing, I did promise that the Minister of Finance would publish all the information in the weekend newspapers, and it was I saw it in the newspapers with all the items that are now attract VAT and those that are VAT-free.
On the same issue of the VAT regime, the 804 VAT hotline that was set up, that hotline is not working at all. And I'm wondering if you're aware of that, because we tried calling yesterday and a few other people called saying that they were trying to access that number to make some complaints, but they were unable to get through. And when we called it did not even connect, it just cut off. And
Yeah.
we've been trying
Yeah, I did speak to the minister, and she said they experienced some technical problems when I think on Friday, and I think she told me that those problems have since been rectified, but I'll certainly check with her following this.
So we are nearing the midterm review of the budget. Any update in terms of what could be expected in terms of adjustments, or is it that the government would be looking as much as possible to operate with the existing expenditure profile?
Well, you can be sure that based on the commitment given by the Prime Minister, we will have a 77% reduction across the board in terms of the allocation to various ministries and agencies. Any more on the midterm review, you'll have to get from the Minister of Finance, but I know he is actively working on it.
Just to go back to the question of the carnival security guards, is it not related to the wider issue of the need for regulation of private security details in terms of how these officers operate, especially in public places as opposed to when they're stationed on private premises? Is there any update on that reform process?
Well, I am not sure that these persons were private security guards operating under any legal framework. They may just have been people hired by the mass bands to provide security services. And so without knowing all of that, I wouldn't want to hazard a guess.
Doesn't that pose a risk? Doesn't that pose a risk of endangering members of the public who may not be involved in carnival, who come across these bands and they want to cross and they get disproportionate force applied to them?
Yeah.
Is there a larger issue that should be looked into?
And there is, and I think that's what the chairman of the NCC meant when he said that they will be looking at the operations of Carnival, and not just in terms of security. I think he mentioned the whole issue of the route and how bands operate.
I know at one point, previous administration was looking at a bill to better regulate private security industry. Is that something that this administration is looking at as well?
That I have not seen it as part of the parliamentary agenda, so I wouldn't want to speak to that.
And also, in terms of the back pay that is owed to members of the protective services, public servants, any update on that issue as well?
I think the Minister of Finance did give a commitment that the back pay would be paid, I think, by the end of the financial year. And there has been no update on that since he gave that commitment.
Is that proving to be difficult in the light of the existing economic challenges?
Well, you've answered your own question, but I think what the Minister of Finance said was that when he gives his mid-year review, he will be speaking to the state of the economy generally, but I know that he is looking at all the economic challenges that are before Trinidad and Tobago in general and the Ministry of Finance in particular.
You mentioned the legislative
I think it will be at some point. I know the AG is working at it, and as soon as he is able to publish it, then I'll certainly advise.
What about, is the government looking at the issue? I recall that maybe it did come up at one point, correct me if I'm wrong, but the issue of sale of state assets or divestment of shares and so on, is that something that is being pursued aggressively at this stage?
Well, as you know, the Cabinet has appointed a committee on the rationalization of state enterprises, and that committee, which has already begun work, is looking at each and every state enterprise, and that is majority state-owned enterprises, but included in that is TSTT, where the government, although it owns 49%, has control of the enterprise. So we're looking at every single state enterprise.
Does that include NGC as well?
Well, I can't say that NGC is the committee's remit extends to NGC, but I do know that we are looking at all state enterprises.
And just one other question: any update on the committee that is reviewing the issue of contracted employees in the public service? I ask this question again in light of reports of persons' contracts ending and concerns about the security of tenure of persons who are employed on contract in the public service.
Well, the committee has submitted one report thus far, refining its terms of reference, and the work continues apace in terms of the committee. Thank you all very much for turning up and asking your question. Thank you.